So thank you so much for joining, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people from all over joining us today. And I'm just going to say a couple of really quick words just to kind of orient us and let you know kind of what this group is all about, and before getting into some of the fun presentations that we have for you today. And this is really, just very briefly, the Museum Publishing Digital Interest Group, or MuPuDIG, who has gathered you here today. And this is a kind of very burgeoning and informal group right now that comprises me, Katie Riley, who's the Director of Publishing at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and three other collaborators who are on the call today: Greg Albers from the Getty, Lauren Macholm from the Art Institute of Chicago, and Emily Zoss from the National Gallery of Art. And we kind of came up with the idea for this last summer when we were all working together through the summer and fall on a digital joint evaluation project of our online scholarly publications. And we had such an amazing experience kind of sharing experiences and comparing notes, and realized, you know, just how much we were able to benefit from those conversations. And so when we were presented the results of the study at the MCN conference, I think it was Lauren who kind of had the idea of, you know, could we have something that's convening maybe every other month, similar to those of you who might be familiar with the Museum Computer Network and some of their SIG groups, like their IIIF group has calls. And if that's a way to kind of create a little bit more of a sense of community while sharing projects. So, so for this first call, and as I think you all know from, if you got the invitation, there's also right now just kind of a simple landing page. There's a sign-up sheet. There's a Slack channel that Greg might say more about later. So we're really just kind of trying to feel this out. This is the very first call. And so we thought that it, just to kick things off, it could be good to do a recap of two presentations on digital publishing that we did at MCN. So one will be the presentation by our group of me, Greg, Emily, and Lauren. But first, we also wanted to invite Alex Bortolot and Kris Thayer from the Minneapolis Institute of Art to talk about their own recent digital publishing project, which they presented at MCN. So in both cases, we're going to be doing like super streamlined versions of those presentations. What kind of the structure of this will be is that Mia will do a brief presentation of about 15 minutes on their project, with about 5 minutes for Q&A at the end. Then we will do the same on the digital publishing project with some Q&A, and we hope that if we don't run over, that will leave us about 10 minutes at the end, just for kind of a more general conversation, and I hope also to solicit ideas for some future calls, get feedback on this call, and see kind of what people would find most useful about this kind of forum. So like I said, again, at any point, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and we'll we get to it in Q&A, or you can certainly just hold your questions and unmute when we get to that portion. So with that, unless there's any other housekeeping that anyone can think of, I will hand it over to Alex and Kris.
All right. Thanks, Katie, for the introduction. And hey, everyone. We're excited to be all here in digital space. And whoops, we have an alarm going here.
Sorry about that.
We'll mute that. Hold on a second.
Hang on a sec.
How are we doing? Perfect. So yeah, we're timing ourselves so that we try to keep things on to 15 minutes. We all have plenty of time for conversation and questions afterwards. So as Katie said, this is a presentation that Kris and I gave at MCN in San Diego, and we've shortened it for this audience here. So we've cut out a lot. Hopefully there'll be time for Q&A afterwards to fill in the blanks. Basically, let me do the share now.
Can everyone see the slides?
Yes. No. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Great.
Good.
Okay. Okay. Then we're all good. So the basically we presented a digital publication that we created using Quire from the Getty. And we come at it from a kind of traditional print publishing background as a museum. This was really our first foray into digital publishing, and Kris and I had been eyeing Quire for a long time as a really interesting toolkit and platform that had a lot of promise, and we had just been kind of waiting for the perfect kind of low risk, smaller scale project with which to demo it. And so we found that in a research, sorry folks, I'm just trying to advance here. Huh.
Slides aren't advancing.
Oh, there we go. There we go. There's a bit of a lag. Okay. To demo this in a research project that in this case had 3 different partners, and part of our brief was to document the research process as well as produce a final kind of research project that was widely distributable. And in this case, we had no publication budget. We kind of bootstrapped the whole thing, and we learned a lot along the way. This is a publication itself, Alcohol's Empire, Distilled Spirits in the 1700s Atlantic World. Basically, it was a 3-way partnership. There we go. Sorry, folks, I'm having a hard time with the transitions. A 3-way partnership between our museum, MIA, as well as the Pre-Modern Food Lab at the University of Minnesota, and a local distilling company named Tattersall. And we each brought our kind of various strengths to this publication and research project. Modern Food Lab, they have a whole library of early medical recipes that we drew from, and then Tattersall, of course, are the only members of the partnership who could legally distill the final product. And the goal was to basically think about how we could structure research activity to speak to the relative strengths of the individual partners. And landing on digital struck us as a really effective way of, as I say, documenting the research process as well as presenting the ultimate product. So for us, why go digital? We had partners, including ourselves and the University of Minnesota, who were, for whom it was really important to have something which really resembled kind of traditional academic publishing. In some cases, people were building their tenure portfolios with this, so it was really important to have that kind of veneer or sheen of true academic publishing. But then we also had industry partners who, for whom that type of writing, frankly, was not natural to them, and were much more comfortable sharing information, for example, through recorded video interviews. And so having a digital publication allowed for multiple types of approaches and multimedia. Additionally, we were all excited to kind of take part ownership over this project and the digital product that came out of it. And so it was important for us to have kind of a neutral co-owned site that didn't feel like the extension of one or the other's partner's website. And then finally, as of this project, we had built in a number of different distribution touch points, lectures, a museum installation, as well as a tasting at the Tattersall Distillery, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, and having something which was kind of packaged and highly portable and easily accessible was really important for us to reach our expected readership. So continuing on the question of why go digital, as Alex mentioned, we had no printing budget at all. We had only a small budget for video. We had a very, very short timeline, and to complicate things, the content was being researched and written at the same time when I was learning the platform and building the layout. Quire allowed us to update as we went along, which was absolutely key with working simultaneously with the content creators. Quire is expandable. There was talk about a side project, which would have been an extra module with some historic food that would have complemented the alcohol content. And so the publication being expandable was really important. And then most importantly, I think we were able to not only present research findings, but the process of the research itself, which in the case of alcohol was really an extra bonus. And why Quire? Well, it's still in beta right now, but when done, we understand it will be free and open source. It has it's responsive to screen size, so it looks just as good on a phone as it does on a desktop.
and it's customizable, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. And it also has a collaborative workflow, which I will also talk about in a bit. Quire allowed us to sort of stress test our internal capacity. What kind of skill sets did we need? What kind and how large of a team did we need to get a publication of this size off the ground? And then create once. This is a really big deal. You create the publication once from a mother set of files and then publish in multi-formats. And we'll get into this more deeply in a bit. And then there's my evil plan. Being in the design department, we get a lot of publication requests that have zero budget attached to them. So the default is usually a PDF. This is so much better. There's so many functions built into a Quire digital publication that you could never have with a PDF. So my evil plan is to sort of convert some of those projects into Quire projects. I want to chat about two really important features. The build once feature from one set of files allows you to create sort of a web browser, which is the publication online. From the same set of files, you can make and print a PDF or an ebook. And as long as the internet exists, I'm assured that it will be searchable, durable, and updatable. But along the way, next slide, there were some surprises. Quire is not a single tool or a process. It's a network of many things that work together. And I had to, in particular, get used to this, which is, you know, what happened to what you see is what you get, because your interface is a text editor. I was working here in Atom, but you can use any text editor, I think. And here's where light coding skills are a plus, because on the next slide, this is what my workspace looked like. On the left was the text editor window, where I made all the changes to both content and style. And on the right is a live web browser preview, which instantly shows you, reflects your changes, which was an awesome way to work. Next slide. Then the second really powerful feature is you can find it in the Quire workflow. This is a highly simplified workflow I just made for myself as I was learning. And I want to focus on this sort of messier part here. Next slide after that. Once you've uploaded all your files, image and text, up to GitHub and created sort of your master layout, you can have your collaborators each have a branch. And a branch is a replica of the master. So each collaborator makes changes using that text editor and previewing the pub on the web browser. They make these changes non-destructively. Nothing is ever lost or overwritten.
All right. Oh, good. Thank you.
It keeps track of all the changes through version control. Periodically, a user can request a review, and then whoever is the owner of the project reviews the changes and additions, reconciles the differences, and when satisfied, merges that branch into the master. And you repeat this process until you are ready to publish.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about our distribution strategy, and we probably should have said at the outset kind of what our roles are at the museum. My role as a content strategist, I live in curatorial affairs. And so think about the content that we create as a curatorial staff and how that is then packaged and distributed. And Kris is our in-house designer and design and editorial. So for distribution strategy, you know, this is kind of a unique project in that we had kind of a built-in audience and built-in mechanisms through which to reach them. I mentioned them kind of at the top of this presentation, live events primarily, but then also owned and nerd media. And the exciting thing for us was to think about how we could take something with the trappings of a traditional print publication and really leverage the inherent opportunities that come with digital channels. In our case, namely social, as well as live events. So this is just an example of two of those channels. One being, you know, we had a in-gallery within our museum, an installation addressing this topic. And so, you know, having QR codes that made people aware of the opportunity to look at this digital publication and then have direct access to it via their own devices was key. And the same holds true for the one of the live events that we had, which was a tasting at Tattersall, our distillery partners. Again, where the QR code became our friend, and just having signage everywhere, tabletop signage and so on, proved to be really effective. I should say that, were we to do this all over again, we would have set things up in GitHub a little differently, where we would have been able to track analytics. We didn't set up our analytics properly, so unfortunately we don't have a clear sense of how many people accessed the publication during the time when we were really promoting it the most. And so that's something that we're kind of being a rookie mistake, but next time we'll do better. Again, owned and earned media by producing digital assets, which did double duty both for the publication as well as to share via social, proved to be really powerful for us. We could leverage the same content twice, basically. And because we had two different PR teams, ours and Tattersall's, kind of working on this publication, or working on promoting this publication, I should say, having one set of digital kind of content and tools, the publication and some of the other assets, allowed us to essentially amplify one another's efforts, as opposed to perhaps creating confusion amongst those who wish to cover it. So that's kind of the distribution strategy in the moment when this event, when this project kind of came to fruition and was being driven by events and social media. But kind of what happens now, so for future findability, how can we ensure that scholars and others who have an interest in this topic can access it, can first of all find it and then access it? I'm happy to say that we've now gotten the publication listed in WorldCat, and we've been looking at a bunch of other potential strategies for making sure that there's a general awareness of its existence. And one thing that I think I would really love to talk about as a group is, what are those catalogs and indices and other places that we should be thinking about in terms of having our publications listed for the future. So kind of wrapping up, we have some thoughts about our experience and why go digital, but equally kind of what goes digital. We found, and this holds true certainly for Quire, but for other publishing forms and toolkits as well. We found it to be hugely successful to basically to archive this research initiative in a final published product. It allowed us to kind of create assets going along the way, and then to aggregate them and push them out and share them in a polished final package. We also feel that the opportunities inherent to digital publishing changes ways in which we can think about a publishing program within certainly our museum. I tend to think of it in terms of lowering the barrier to entry for the types of the types of scholarly publishing that we can do. And Kris, you have some thoughts on other types of publishing opportunities that you're more familiar with?
Yeah, the more people see we've published not only Alcohol's Empire, but one other publication which came out of our education department. A lot of departments here at the museum are doing research, and if we can get more of it out there and findable, this is a great way to do it. It was really fun, and I think it will allow more departments in our museum to make more research available.
And similarly, because we're able to, let me pause and say, that there are inherent costs to any publishing project. We all know this in terms of staff hours. We're lucky enough to have staff editors at our museum, as well as Kris, our designer. So some things are kind of, sunk costs by virtue of their operating budget. Nonetheless, by kind of disaggregating a print budget from a publishing project, as we could with Alcohol's Empire, it does make us think that there are, many more opportunities to publish, proceedings, for example, of conferences and so on. And now that we know of this kind of opportunity and know some of the, kind of in-house costs and time commitments associated with it, that I think allows us to think about how we can really promote greater diversity in what is published, and also kind of whose work can be published, which we're excited about. And then lastly, kind of along the same lines, simply kind of creating a more robust ecosystem of information online, always contributing more scholarly digital material to the, kind of the internet writ large, I think will have, and I think probably many of us would agree, will have a kind of net positive effect on, creating and sustaining kind of the robustness of some of those really popularly accessible resources like Wikipedia, for example. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. Maybe now we could open it up for questions.
Do we unshare now? I think we do.
Question that came up in the chat window right away, which is about print on demand.
Yes.
What was the question?
The question is, did you look into a print on demand offering?
Well, we were working with a pretty early version of Quire, and if you're looking at Alcohol's Empire, the PDF version the function is turned off. The Getty hadn't quite gotten that finessed yet. Our second publication, the PDF function had come along a long way, and we turned that function back on. We have not tested what happens when you send it to an ebook. I know that we've done that with some of the other institutions' publications. It's kind of cool. You say, print on demand, and something arrives in the mail, I don't know, a few days later. We have not tested that with this publication.
It's something that we're interested in doing, though, so it's absolutely, very much on our radar as something we'd like to explore further with future projects.
Any other questions?
Hi there, it's Katie. You kind of touched upon this a little bit when you were talking about just, Kris, some of the skill sets that you kind of had to develop on the fly, and some of the things that you learned that, it's not like a single thing. It's not just you download it onto your computer and you start working on it, like that. No. It is more complicated. Would there be sort of general advice from you on the sorts of things, either in terms of skill sets that you would need on your team, or training that it would be useful to have in advance before kind of diving into something like this?
Oh, for sure. I should say, though, that I have a print background. I'm not a developer. So everything I needed to learn, I learned online by myself. Just, Khan Academy, Code Academy, a workman's learning of HTML and CSS. And then you do need to become familiar with a text editor, some, Pandoc, GitHub. There's a whole nomenclature that I had to get used to. But and the workflow is a little bit different. The proofing system in particular, it varies quite a bit from a print workflow. So the next person who will learn Quire at MIA will learn it much faster, because I will be able to sit down with them and say, this is how you do it. So the first person in any institution is just going to take a little bit longer. And if anyone was curious about all the parts and pieces that go together with this, that make up sort of the Quire ecosystem, they can just email me directly. There's really great documentation that Greg from the Getty has put together in Quire, actually, that's really very helpful. I think I accessed that hundreds of times as I was building Alcohol's Empire. So there are resources out there.
And if I could just tag on, I think one of the things that worked really well for us was we kind of took a hybrid approach. We took a fairly standard workflow for print publications, in terms of, authors submit drafts are edited, then drafts are put into the platform. And then I think you even, when you were editing and layout, you produced printouts, is that right?
No, what we did is we sent a working URL to all our collaborators, and they viewed it online just the way we do.
So there were some aspects of the workflow that we were able to kind of, utilize more familiar workflows in this instance, and the digital tool set is flexible enough to kind of allow for different types of workflows depending on what your skills are and what your expectations are amongst contributors. So that was really helpful.
I think we're probably only going to have time for one more question, Alex and Kris.
Okay.
Could I suggest, there's a question here from Ilya about whether you have any long-term maintenance concerns for the project. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
You mean in terms of the publications that we already have published?
I'm thinking from what you've published today on GitHub.
Sure.
Okay.
Honestly, no. All the content, is static content that isn't pulling from other sources. It might be different if we were pulling GIS map files, or collections data from a different back end. But in this case, it's a fairly self-contained set of contents, and so if Quire doesn't last, we'll have those contents that we can express them a different way in the future. So and that said, I've already updated Alcohol's Empire several times. I could update it every day. So anytime someone accesses the URL, it's the freshest content. So yes, it's, when you use the word static, I think people think that it is somehow frozen in time, and it's not. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. So we'll.
All right, and Emily, will you queue up the next one? All right. Through all of the work that you did, and as Greg, for those of you keeping an eye on the chat window, Greg noted that there are a lot of other questions in there. We'll see if we have some time at the end to circle back to them. Otherwise, there are all sorts of ways that we can follow up on the Slack channel or the email newsletter, because there's just a lot of really wonderful insights and questions that people have. So with that, though, we'll kind of switch to the second presentation, which is on the study that we did, that the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Art Institute of Chicago, and the Getty Museum did this fall on our digital publications, and that we presented at MCN. So this is a super abbreviated presentation on that, and we're really just going to try to give kind of like enough of the general sort of taste or top level findings. And there is the study, as I think we sent the link around along with the email to you all already, but you can browse it at leisure. Also built in Quire. This is not one long form advertisement for Quire, but so there's plenty of time for you guys to look at it on your own separately. So before diving into the study, and Emily, could you go to the next slide? We thought it would be useful to just very, very briefly kind of set up the projects that were actually under consideration, but really trying to focus most of our time on the findings. So very briefly, I'll start with the PMAs. So just for some context, the department at the PMA, we publish a 10, print and now one digital publication a year. This was the very first online scholarly publication for the museum. It features approximately 60 object entries and long form essays, focusing on the John G. Johnson collection of largely old master paintings at the museum. Some special features of the publication are that our library and archives digitized a great amount of content that is to directly from notes and references in the publication. So you can find the original letters and find them directly from that. And we also have selectively integrated content from our online collections database, TMS. So there was a custom pipeline that was built in which we used a combination of Word files with marked up shortcodes and metadata spreadsheets to generate the JSON files that were used to build the site. The advantage of this is that it allows editors and authors to work in a familiar system for as long as possible. And it also creates kind of a static, like, archived version. The Word version is always the ultimate sort of version of the publication. So we kind of, as I said, it was the first one. A team of people working together on this for the first time who had never collaborated together. So we knew that when we finished, we felt really proud, but there was also, you know, as Kris was saying, the first time you do anything, there's a big learning curve. That certainly was the case for us. So we knew that there were things that we wanted to improve, but we also wanted to make sure that we had some feedback from real users. And so that was why we were very interested in embarking on this joint evaluation with the other museums.
And for us at the Getty, so we published our first online publication sort of in the new, using what is now called Quire, but we published the first one in the spring of 2016. And we've done actually it was earlier in there, but we've done a number since then. 6 or 7 have now been published using their publication software. And so we were really interested in testing the assumptions of what kind of the work that we did figuring these out when we first started. We did some user-centered design work at the very beginning of our process, trying to figure out how we wanted to build these and what they should look like, what kind of functions we would need. And of course, we looked back at other catalogs and publications from other institutions. But we wanted to, having done that work, we wanted to take this opportunity to kind of step back and see if those assumptions were correct. We were also thinking, because we have a number of these catalogs in the pipeline coming forward, and we're working on the software that we're hoping others will use, we wanted to be sure that we were kind of doing it the best thing for going forward the best way possible. So the main sort of features of ours is that they are multi-format. So we do PDF and ebook as well as the sort of main online edition. But otherwise the design is fairly simple and straightforward. It's fairly linear. It's made to be a contained kind of website. And yeah, that's about it. And then there's some interactive maps and other kinds of things that make it sort of, that we wanted to test out as well. Thanks.
Yeah. The National Gallery of Art has an active print publishing program and a few ongoing digital research initiatives, but our major digital work centers on the online editions, which is our series of online collection catalogs. The OE publishing platform is integrated in our main collection pages on our website rather than being a standalone entity, and this architecture remains a primary distinguishing feature of our catalogs. We've used the platform to publish 6 catalogs so far, either in full or partial releases since we launched in spring 2014 with Dutch paintings of the 17th century. And we chose to focus on the Dutch catalog for our evaluation in this study for a few reasons. It's received sustained attention over the years, including several rounds of editions, and it's also representative of the format and structure of the OEs, as well as our general approach to this type of content. So we've had a lot of questions that we wanted to investigate with users in this study, including whether our target audiences were finding and using this resource. And we also wanted to look very carefully at the impacts of the choice to integrate the catalogs into our collection pages on user experience.
And at the Art Institute of Chicago, we typically say that as a publishing department, we publish between 12 and 15 titles a year. So we have a very healthy print publication program. And on the digital side, we have 14 digital publications that we've published since June 2014. We were part of the Online Scholarly Catalog Initiative, which sort of kicked off digital publishing at the Art Institute. And we're still using the OSCE toolkit, which was developed at that time, but we've made certain adjustments to and worked on throughout the years. So because we've made certain tweaks and we've had different opportunities with the OSCE toolkit, we actually evaluated 2 catalogs. One is the Monet paintings and drawings at the Art Institute of Chicago, which we used for the analytics and more sort of longevity side of the evaluation. And the other is our very recent catalog on Matisse. And we wanted to evaluate that catalog because it featured many different types of objects. So we could do three-dimensional 360 spins, as well as paintings and conservation research that we've been publishing more recently. The features in these catalogs sort of run the gamut of things that we've talked about thus far: zoomable images, 360-degree rotating images, layered and annotated images, and we have citation tools and the other types of tools that the catalogs have. But we also have this book-like navigation that was developed with the original toolkit in 2000. Well, it's nearing 10 years old. And this system, because it is as old as it is, we wanted to make sure that we were still addressing the concerns of the scholarly community and that we were still designing and presenting the information in a way that was really responding to how people approach scholarly content online. So we were really excited to kick off this study with our three partners. And so I'm going to take us into a little bit about how the study came together, and then I'll pass it off to my colleagues to go over some of the main findings of the study. So once we all came together and decided to do this, we knew that we all had this great knowledge of how to produce these catalogs, but we weren't really sure how people were approaching them, how people were using them, and whether or not that they were worth our investment. The whole study was really geared around these users, because even in a print world, we didn't have a great access into users and how to best design for them. So all of us had employed user-centered design practices when developing our publications in order to define those audiences, but we all recognized we hadn't taken the time to do that valuable post-launch work of user-centered evaluation. So we also discussed how hard it was to sustain conversations with our peers about these topics and to share our learning. So we wanted this to become the basis for a more sustained field-wide conversation. So these were our main research questions. The study was intended to help us better understand users. So all of these questions are really geared towards them, who they are, what they want, what works well for them, and what they think of digital publishing and the scholarly value and opportunity of these catalogs in general. We also wanted to reflect on the best ways to measure success of the digital catalogs based on what we had learned through this project, so that we could provide guidance for researchers conducting future studies. So to answer these questions, Rockman et al., who is our consultant, designed a plan that would help us secure feedback from users, potential users and current users, and that would allow them to give us different types of feedback in different formats. So we have a review of the Google Analytics. We had a pop-up survey that appeared on the catalogs. We had a longer form survey that we sent out via different email distribution channels. And we convened 25 people in 5 focus groups with homework so that they could spend a good amount of time with the catalogs and have a discussion. And that was the form of their feedback.
So we're going to turn now to discussing the major findings from the study. The first was that these catalogs are clearly serving a large and diverse user base. Analytics data shows that the catalogs receive anywhere from 3,000 to more than 100,000 visitors in a year, depending on how the catalog is integrated with the parent museum website. The pop-up survey data showed that roughly half of the catalog's visitors were in the target audience group for the catalogs. For the purposes of this study, we defined our target audiences as including scholars and researchers, museum professionals, university students and professors, librarians, archivists, and journal editors. So the catalogs are therefore serving their intended audience and serving them well, but we found that they're also being used by a significant proportion of people who may not be in the intended target audience, such as artists, art enthusiasts, teachers outside of the collegiate level, museum visitors and volunteers, and of course, casual browsers. The most commonly cited reason for visiting the catalogs was interest in individual works, followed by seeking research information. But overall, the data suggests the need to consider diverse user perspectives when approaching the design of these catalogs, even if you think that they may be mainly targeted to a research audience. The second of our major findings centered on the digital tools and the features that we're providing in these catalogs. One of the great benefits of these catalogs, of course, is the quantity of information that they can make available to users, including specialized research audiences. However, some readers reported feeling overwhelmed by too much technical information, so finding the right way to organize the catalog and layer the information for these diverse audiences is clearly important. Another advantage of digital catalogs is the variety of the technological tools that we can build into the interface to enrich the user experience. Some of the tools present in the 4 catalogs you've heard about in the introductions. They included citation generators, zoomable images, 360-degree views of objects, audiovisual content, and image comparison tools. Throughout the study, we sought feedback from users on which specific tools they found most useful. The ability to zoom and download high-quality images, predictably, was extremely important to participants. The highest-rated individual digital tool was actually the PMA's integration of digitized archival material. It was wildly popular, and it's a unique feature, I think, among the catalogs in this study. We found that participants sometimes quibbled about the specific format of citation tools, but they did point out that the tools can help students, and they also draw attention to the fact that these are resources that can and should be cited properly. So by providing citation guidance, the catalogs are asserting their own validity as a scholarly resource.
Great, thank you, Emily. The next major finding we want to talk about is the design preferences. Lauren mentioned in her introduction of the AIC's catalogs that they have a unique sort of book-like interface where you're scrolling horizontally to go page by page. When the AIC launched that interface, I can say from looking on the outside, it was to great acclaim. It was really highly respected. It was people loved that aspect of it. It really gave it a strong book-like feel, which I think helped convert a lot of skeptics to the format, both probably as readers and internally in creating these books. Today, it's really the opposite. We really saw that in these studies and in user studies and the various email responses and surveys, people really preferred a much quicker scrolling website-like navigation. So having to click through page by page seemed like a hindrance to people, rather than a kind of, as it used to act, I think, as a kind of a salve or a balm to reading digitally. So that was one part of it. Another thing we found was that participants needed to be able to quickly understand where in the publication they were. So as they moved from object to object or clicking on various links, moving through these publications, we had a lot of comments about how easily it was to get lost or not be able to get back to where they were, or not understand where in the catalog they were. In this screenshot here at the very top, actually not the part that's circled, but right above it, there's a little breadcrumb there that says online editions. Thank you, Emily. And Dutch paintings, that gives you the title. That kind of breadcrumb path through the publication helped people understand where they were and other kinds. So that was an important part of things. So when we're thinking about designing these catalogs going forward, I think we're all thinking about how can we better place our readers in the catalogs in a way that they know where they are. And then also people liked tools, they liked the different citation things, the downloads, the zooming images. They liked when those things were present, but they needed to be obvious. So they didn't want a sleek design where things were getting lost, or it might look visually very appealing from a publisher standpoint, but was not so clear from the reader standpoint. So things like this in the PMA's catalog here in the circle to the top were clear icons. They were always in the same place. So users became familiar with where to look for how to download, how to cite, how to share, how to search. You can see in the zooming images tools, they're also very clear, big. So always make them bigger and clearer than you think they should be, was kind of the overall lesson there. And then the next, also in scholarly value. So certainly, and when we started doing these books, it was a question really of even, would people accept these as scholarly content? Both, would people author them, and would people reading them also feel comfortable citing them? That was a big deal about what we went, thinking back 5-10 years ago, in terms of a big open question. Right now, it's complete. It's a complete shift. People are very, very comfortable with these publications. We had a lot of comments that were seemed to indicate, like, whenever we were asking about, do you feel comfortable citing this? Would you feel comfortable authoring one of these? A lot of times people were quick to just say, yeah, that's fine. Let's move on with the conversation. Let's not worry about that anymore. So we've really seen a big sort of paradigm shift in what people how people approach these digital catalogs. And then they do think that they like all the sort of rich, in-depth information that they can get in these catalogs. I think there was some comments about surfacing that information in the right time, like not letting users feel overwhelmed, but really thinking, giving them a chance to dive in deeper as they needed to, but not sort of throw it all at them in the front. And then there was this last note that there was some, in a sort of, I think it was, we kind of in our discussions thought of this as sort of a younger generation reading essays about these objects. They thought that perhaps that those essays might have been biased by the museum's position. I think that there's, on the flip side, people often think of essays about artworks as showing an aspect of authority about their objects, but that authority also is now coming with a little bit of question in terms of whether that's a biased authority. And then I think that's it on that slide, yeah? So this, I talked about the citing online materials doesn't cause as much hesitation as it once did. They really wanted to move on with the conversation. And then also in terms of changing and updates, people want to see these things change. They expect to see the newest information, but there was also some hesitancy about how that newest information was going to be presented and whether they felt comfortable knowing whether it was the newest or whether it was not. And if so, how do they find out when it was revised or when it was last published or where the newest information was? There are also some comments about the connections between these catalogs and their collections pages. I think many of our catalogs link to the collections pages on our website. If that catalog isn't the collections page in that case, if it's a separate site, we can link back and forth, but there's some question about that relationship and kind of clarifying that. And then, as you can see in this graphic as well, a lot of people that we talked to, and it might have been a self-selecting group because we did go out and with this email survey, we were asking people to participate. So they might have participated because they liked digital catalogs. But you can see here that there's a high percentage of people who had some experience with them, whether in just browsing or reading them, or whether citing them, or whether actually contributing to them.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. So that was it. That was our whirlwind tour. If you haven't had a chance to look at the report yet, there's the link for it on this. I also put it in the group chat, so you can link directly from that. And that is even just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the more detailed information that each of us got on our individual catalogs. And I think we all are working right now on what this means for the ones that we're producing now. So we have about 8 minutes left on the call, and we can certainly answer some specific questions about this. Greg, Emily, and Lauren in particular, I think that one thing I'll just say, just so that I don't forget, is that we have a kind of hold for the next one of these calls for March 24th, is that right? Tuesday, March 24th, also at noon Eastern Standard Time. And we have no idea what we'll be talking about then. So we hope to solicit advice and recommendations, and anybody who's working on their own project who would be interested in sharing it in a similar way, we would love to hear from you. But maybe there are a couple of questions in the chat. So I'll see, let's see, there's one about DOIs, which are digital object identifiers. We actually do include, the question is, I'm curious about everyone's decision not to include DOIs in publications to make them more accessible in scholarly databases and easier to cite. For those of you who aren't familiar with these, they're used much more in kind of scientific and academic environments than in museums, certainly, and in the humanities. And the idea is that it will allow your publication to resolve even if the URL changes. So it's one of those signatures of permanence and stability. We did use them on the PMA publication specifically for that reason. Many people who did the survey or did the study didn't know what they were. Those of them who did thought it was great. So I think some of it is also just educating, as Greg referenced. We learned that there's a lot all along the way of like, it doesn't pay to be subtle, be really obvious at the moment when people are dropping into it of like, what is this that you're looking at and why does it matter? Because it is a kind of a good practice, and for people who understand what it is kind of a signifier.
Katie, I'll just jump in there really quickly to say, we had a whole conversation about it when we first made the catalogs, and we did decide as you mentioned in the comments, that they weren't really necessary for scholarly resources, or they kind of seemed to indicate something that was more website than scholarly publication at the time. But going forward, we would absolutely include them. We had a focus group of actually librarians and journal people who work on scholarly journals as part of the focus group homework. One of the focus groups. And that group was really, really useful in their feedback, having to do with both like where you should be listing your catalog, what kinds of identifiers you should have, and how to best use the sort of digital scholarly space to make your catalog both findable and sort of permanent in that space. So there's a lot more on that topic within the evaluation.
Let me see, Jane had asked about basic object information versus interpretive texts, and the connection between them. And Jane, actually, if you wanted to unmute yourself and just ask the question to clarify, you're welcome to do so. One thing that was interesting as was early on in terms of what people were looking for. I think 40% of people said that they were there looking for information on a specific object. So for us, it was interesting to see that the focus and where our attention really was kind of best spent in terms of the expectations for museum publications was on those object entries. That was where people felt like we were able to provide information that was unique, and they were maybe less interested in interpretive texts around them. That was something that was clear just from our own individual analytics, but it was interesting to kind of have that borne out in what other people said. So I think that it's just as us thinking about future publications, like we probably will have only introductory essays and really focus our attention in the development of content around particular objects. So I don't know if that kind of answers that question, but in terms of focusing our attention on content and expectations for museum publications in general, that was what we learned.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Jane. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think maybe without being aware of it, I was thinking of exhibition catalogs as opposed to collection catalogs. And so maybe a related question is, do any of you see a relationship to exhibition catalogs with the OSCE project?
I can take that quickly. We have, of the 14 catalogs that we've published, I think 4 of them are related to exhibitions. So we have had certain catalogs that are collection catalogs and certain catalogs that are exhibition catalogs. For us, the idea of publishing on this online platform originally started with a way to do long form scholarly research on our collection and to publish that in a way that wasn't these huge tomes that were really, really expensive and difficult and small print runs and that kind of thing. So it was filling a particular need within the scholarly space. At this point, because we have this this stream with which to publish content, we have found ways of publishing exhibition content on there as well, and I think it's been a great place to be able to do that, especially when you want the material to be accessible for a really wide audience across continents, across you know, different types of spaces. So we've seen that it is, you know, it's been as applicable in sort of exhibition spaces as collection spaces. I will say that the collection research does seem a little bit more, it satisfies the mission towards like longevity of publishing on our collection in a particular way that the exhibition catalogs have a more focused content. So we've seen a lot more traffic to our collections catalogs than we have to the exhibitions ones, which sort of drops off once the exhibition is over.
Great, thank
All
you.
right. Well, we are at 12:59. Oh, it just turned 1 o'clock. So we don't want to take up, I'm sure other people have things to get to. So we will, one thing I'll just say, if you haven't already, particularly if you just got a link to this, an email invitation, and you haven't gone in and signed up on the MuPuDIG, to the MuPuDIG mailing list. And Greg, I don't know if you can throw the link into the chat just of that kind of landing page. It would be great for you to sign up there, because then that way, if we have follow-up to this, you'll get future communications, and we'll kind of keep you updated. If there is anything that we're going to be actively soliciting people to participate in the next one. So please reach out to us if you have a project, or if you've heard about a project that you're interested in knowing about, that you'd like us to kind of follow up on with someone else. So I think that's it for now. Thank you so much to everyone for coming, and thank you so much to Alex and Chris.
Things that you'd like us to address or additional questions, we'll do our best to get back to you, but that's also where you should send things.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.